Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to join us this afternoon, this morning, depending on where you are. This January, we are talking about such an important topic. It is Beyond Happy Hour, building sober and recovery friendly workplaces, which is a relevant topic. Many people are doing dry January right now. Many people may or may not be drinking for whatever reason. I know a lot of younger generations are not interested in alcohol. So I want to make sure that this is something that folks feel comfortable having discussion. So I want to first and foremost thank our panelists for being here, for taking the time and prioritizing this conversation. As I mentioned, today's session is going to focus on those sober friendly and recovery friendly workplaces. And I want to clearly set some expectations on how we'll approach this discussion. This isn't a clinical discussion, and it's not a space where everyone is expected to share personal details. Disclosure is always optional and welcome. Obviously, no one on this panel is here to represent any one experience. At the same time, we recognize that lived experience, when shared by choice, can offer valuable insight into how workplace systems actually land. We will make space for that perspective without centering or requiring it. At its core, this is a business conversation about culture, inclusion, and risk. Alcohol and substance use are deeply embedded in professional norms, often without intentional design. For some employees, that creates exclusion or pressure. For others, it creates a real risk. And as culture norms continue to shift to more people choosing to abstain of or limit alcohol use, this becomes an even more relevant topic, as I mentioned. Becoming sober friendly and recovery friendly is not about prohibition or policing behavior outside of, what we would normally expect in a workplace. It's about designing environments where people can participate fully, safely, and with dignity, regardless of where they are in their lives. Recovery friendly workplaces recognize that recovery is not a moment, it is a process. And workplaces play a role in either supporting stability or in creating unnecessary friction. And today, I'm so grateful that we have this amazing group of panelists to help explore how organizations can move beyond silence or crisis response towards thoughtful, proactive design. And so with that, we will go around and introduce each of our panelists. I always forget to introduce myself, so I guess I'll start. I'm Stephanie Lemick. I'm the founder and CEO of the Wounded Workforce and a former HR executive. So this is a very important topic to me. Colleen, will you kick us off and introduce yourself?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks so much for inviting me to this esteemed panel. Colleen Loria, I am president of Ginger HR Consulting. I also am currently a senior business partner with a technology company, QuickBase. This topic, were you asking why this topic is important, or we're just going around right now?
You know what? You can jump right in and say why this topic is important to you. I like it. Let's do it.
Okay, so this topic is important to me because personally, I'm coming up on 5 years of sobriety, and I don't want thank you, very proud of myself. I don't want anyone to take as long as I did to be able to appreciate life with a fully clear head. I'm also super appreciative of environments that recognize that not everyone drinks alcohol. And as an HR professional, I know that people are more successful when they can be themselves and not feel like they're masking or pretending. So that's why this topic is important to me.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Aaron, you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Aaron Winder. I'm the founder of Winder Law Firm. This topic is important to me because similarly, I have 11 years, in recovery, and I think it's just important to live my recovery out loud, if you will. That way, folks can see an example and be willing to live their recovery out loud, or give it a try, or anything like that.
I love that. Thank you so much, Aaron. Ellie.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm Ellie Gall. I'm Director of People and Culture for Cascade AIDS Project, which is a nonprofit organization where we provide services, both social services and health services for folks who are living with or at risk of HIV. I'll give the standard kind of disclaimer that my opinions today are my own and not my organization's. And this topic is really important to me because I want everybody to be able to have the best possible chance to succeed in life. And I don't have personal lived experience in recovery specifically, but I've had other mental health and disability related challenges that have certainly impacted me in workplaces before. And like so many things, when we talk about inclusion, when we do things to include one specific group and make a good workplace for folks, in this case, who are in recovery, right, it improves it for everybody because that culture and that openness and the ability to give people what they need in any particular moment, it's going to benefit the whole workplace and it's going to make it a better place.
Amazing. Love that so much. Thank you. So glad you could join us. Mitchell.
Hi. Yeah, so my name is Mitchell Jeffrey. I am the founder and principal consultant with the Ember Collective. And the Ember Collective, we work specifically in the behavioral health arena, and we do work with other healthcare agencies as well. But as a fractional HR consulting firm, my career, half of it has been spent solely in behavioral health, working in substance use disorder facilities and psychiatric facilities, and running HR departments for large behavioral health organizations. So kind of professionally, it's been my lane for a while to work in this space. And then personally, of course, I've got some connections with family members that have struggled with addiction.
Amazing. So great to have you. Jessica, close us out.
Hello, hello. I am Jessica Winder. I am the Chief People Officer at Winder Law Firm. Aaron happens to be my husband. So we get to work together. I'm not in the office right now, though. And then I am also an author and a career coach and do a lot of public speaking. And on Tuesday, actually, I celebrated 6 years of sobriety. So it is very personal to me as well. I talk a lot about my recovery and honestly, the things that I did when I was drinking at my job and I was the head of HR. So I talk really openly about that. So that is really, really important to me. And one thing I just want to quickly address is that you see that little bar behind Aaron, that is all non-alcoholic stuff. And it's stuff that we decided, we were like, you know what, we want to have sobriety and all that and be really open about it. And so we actually had that in our house, but now we have toddlers and there's no way that that would be in our house and not be broken. So it has since been moved to the office.
I love it though. I love it. And I think there's a little fun aspect of the conversation we can hit on there. Yeah. And I also have to say, this is the Wounded Workforce's first panel discussion featuring a husband and a wife. And I cannot imagine a more perfect pair to have join us. So thank you. And thank you all so much. I know this can be a tricky topic, a challenging topic, and it just means so much that you all are willing to be here and offer your perspective professionally and also your personal lived experience. So thank you so much. I want to jump in and start with the question, when we talk about sober friendly and recovery friendly workplaces, what do those terms mean to you from a professional or organizational standpoint? And anyone who wants to jump in, feel free to unmute and pipe up whenever you're ready.
I can kick us off and I can tell you what it's not. So back in the day when I started my career, I used to work in oil and gas at a company that I will not name. But every Friday at 3:00, we had a cart like you see, but it was full of alcohol, like true alcohol. And we would walk around and we would make everybody drinks. And then everybody would go to the bar. Every activity was centered around alcohol. And at the time, I was actively participating in all of those things. There was never a time I wasn't at the bar cart. But everything that we did was around drinking. There was no activity. There was nothing that was not drinking. And if you were not drinking, it was are you pregnant or what's going on? You would be questioned. There was no if and buts about it. You were going to be questioned about it. So when you think about having an environment where it is not the center of attention, that is what I think of. Now when I'm thinking of planning events, if you want to drink, it is available to you, but it is not the center of what we are doing. And that's the difference.
I'm happy to add to what Jessica said. I also try to plan events that are not centered around alcohol, and that can be things like volunteering, learning and development events, athletic events. But there are so many other alternatives out there, and once you take that social equals alcohol equation out of it, you really find your creativity.
I think I would take it one step further, even beyond just activities at work. And for me, it is cultivating a environment in which, people are safe to disclose when they have an issue. They are safe to not participate in things, right? There's a lot of psychological safety component to it. And so I really think it's a matter of how does leadership cultivate and represent themselves at these environments, whether they are, to Jessica's point, asking a question about why aren't you drinking, right? Is that a necessary question, right? So really being cognizant about how we as leaders show up to those spaces, and are we unintentionally, kind of pushing that environment on these folks when we don't really actually need to.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just add to that. I think that's absolutely right. And that it's important to create an environment where it's also fine if folks don't want to disclose, that they can still make the choices they need to make for themselves without being questioned, right? Because kind of like Jessica said, right, that I don't necessarily want someone, if I'm just choosing not to have a drink one day, to be asking if I'm pregnant. I may or may not be pregnant, but like that's not really a question I need someone to be asking. We can let people make their own choices. And one of the things I think we can do, and I love that you have that kind of non-alcoholic bar cart behind you, Aaron, is to have, if we are doing a happy hour, we are having an event where there is alcohol available, right? Have fun mocktail options, non-alcoholic things where you can feel like you're participating in that, still having, a special drink, but it doesn't have to be alcoholic. And just making that a normalized option can really go a long way towards that.
Yep, and that's exactly right. Obviously, it's my firm. I'm the leader of the firm, and I don't drink. And so my entire staff knows that. And in the law, just like a lot of other professions, there's lots of socializing around alcohol, right? In fact, there's some times where it's hard to get ahead, right, in a firm if you're not socializing around alcohol. But here we don't do that. We don't do a lot of happy hours and things like that. But I've also had to realize that I still want to do some happy hours, right? Even though I don't drink at those happy hours, some folks do. And in an effort to normalize not drinking, I like to include some happy hours and some gatherings with and without alcohol, so that it becomes, like I said, more normalized and not a big deal either way if you decide to drink or not.
I love that so much. Already so many good things coming from this conversation. When we think about the workplace, and we've heard some of this come up already in the conversation, but where do alcohol and substance related norms show up most commonly in workplace culture today? I know we've already heard a little bit about that after work happy hour, but what else? What other ways do we see this coming up?
Something that comes to mind for me, which honestly just popped into my head, and I've never thought of it this way before, is a lot of people in meetings, when they're talking about how stressed they are, will say, like, I can't wait till 5 o'clock till I have my glass of wine. And I like it doesn't everybody has their own lived experience, and so that doesn't necessarily trigger me, but it might trigger someone else. And so sensitivity to that is really important. But, I hear that a lot in the workplace.
I mean, I think we've talked about events being another big one, whether it's the annual holiday party or whatever the case is. Sales meetings are a huge one for sure. If you've never worked in a sales environment, that's sometimes feels like that's all they are. And then another big one that's top of mind for me as I'm preparing to go to one here in a couple of weeks, but would be conferences. right? Conferences are another major source of that for people. And I could imagine, especially for individuals in recovery, a source of anxiety in attending those, because so much of the networking at those events is post those sessions during the day. And so where do people go? They go immediately to the bar, right? So another one top of mind for me.
When we think about those norms and how we see them show up, do any of you have any kind of lived experience that you are willing to share in terms of how you've seen norms play out in ways that supported you or others, or maybe complicated some participation in the workplace or in workplace culture?
Well, one of the conferences I attend yearly, it's actually in Las Vegas too. There's actually, an AA meeting every morning, and I think there's one every afternoon as well. And actually, I don't really go to a lot of meetings these days, but as you kind of alluded to, going to conferences can provoke anxiety in and of itself, and then knowing how much alcohol is a big part of the conference, or can be. Knowing that those meetings are there, even if I attend or I don't attend, has been very helpful. In a few of the conferences I've went to, it seems like that's becoming more of a normal thing to have some sort of space for, a recovery meeting, which has been very helpful.
I would say I want to give like a quick little like tip here is that when I first got sober, I felt a lot of shame around it, and I actually didn't tell anybody. Like I just flat out was like, nobody's gonna know I'm gonna do this secretly. So, but I still had at the time I had a job where I was expected to be going out and to be doing things and to be networking, and so I would show up to events early. I would literally tell the bartender, like pull the bartender aside and be like, listen, I'm trying to get sober, but I don't want these people to know. And every single time the bartender was like, got you. And so they would make me something that looked like it would be like cranberry juice or something, but they would make it for me. And I would go back to the same bartender every single time. And that is just like something that if you're listening to this and it's something that you're thinking about, you want to do, but you don't know how, I want to give like realistic things that I actually did. So I actually literally just told the bartender, please help me. I'm trying to get sober, but I don't want these people to know. And they would make me something. And it never failed. They were always on board with it. So I just want to give that like tip and trick of like, if you have to go to these events and you don't want people to know and you're not at a point in your recovery where you want to talk about it, that's the way to do it. I did it for over a year and no one knew. And actually, when I told people I got sober, they were like, well, we just saw you drinking. And I was like, you did not. You don't know what I had in my cup.
Well, I think to add to Stephanie's direct question about, what supports or complicates the work, one of the things that comes to mind for me, and again, I'm not an individual in recovery, but just from my own lived experience around as I started to climb the corporate ladder and you start getting into those senior level executive roles, often one of the challenges is getting intimate time with decision makers. And so often the only time you can get that intimate time with these folks is at these dinners when you're traveling with them or going to the bar after work. And I found myself even going, gosh, I don't want to go to this dinner, but I have to, right? Like I've got to go, or I've got to go to the bar because I don't know when the next time is. I'm going to get an hour with this person to demonstrate why or how good I do my job or why I should deserve that promotion or all the things that I've done for the department to make it amazing, right? And so it really does complicate work, especially as you climb that ladder, because you have such limited physical space really to be intimate with these individuals. And that is some of the only time you actually get with them.
I think I'm a bad facilitator because I decide I'm going to be a panelist sometimes too. So, here I go. But I think there's a really important lesson here. And, I'll reflect back on my own time as a leader in an organization where there was like a really like heavy happy hour culture, and I didn't love it for a variety of reasons. And there are maybe a lot of HR professionals who are coming off holiday parties that are like, yeah, I don't like happy hour culture for a variety of reasons too. But one of the big things was I didn't feel like it was inclusive. And there's just like a couple things here, I think, for leaders to understand. Whether you're sober, you're in recovery, whether, that's not something that crosses your mind, is, are you making it okay? And Mitchell got to it. Are you making this okay, psychologically safe to not have a drink? And, I love Jessica's tip. I think that's fantastic. How you can practically navigate these situations and feel comfortable navigating your own journey. But as leaders, you don't always have to have a cocktail at happy hour. How about don't have a cocktail at happy hour sometimes? I was really deliberate. I had a long drive home from the office. And so I was really deliberate, and I was like, yeah, I'm not drinking. I've got my seltzer, and I was really visible with it and making sure and making really clear I'm not drinking, and here's why. And I also think for leaders, Mitchell hit on something that's so right on. Like, it's the party or the dinner or the drinks after the dinner, and that's how you like rub elbows and hobnob with the guy. Like, why do you need to drink with your employees? Like, why do you need to have what's it about? Like, maybe reflect on that. I think it's okay to want to unwind and do those things, but I think for many of us, especially in leadership positions, I think we need to reflect on our own power and how those dynamics play out, especially for people who are navigating sobriety, recovery. They just want to go to bed. Like, I like to go to bed at like 9:30. So there's all of these things. It doesn't mean I don't deserve FaceTime or connection. It's thinking about, how do I create equitable access to myself as a leader? Happy hour isn't it. Drinks after dinner isn't it. And if that's what you're doing, intentionally or not, it might be a moment to revisit that in your career if you really want to be dedicated to supporting better workplaces. I'll get off my little Stephanie decided to be a panelist soapbox now.
I love that, Stephanie. And if you don't mind me just adding to that, for those of us who are comfortable saying it, disclosing our lived experiences and saying what our situations are, I do feel a bit of a responsibility to be out there and to be vocal about it. And I have heard from colleagues who have come to me and said, I saw that post that you did, or I really appreciate that you asked for a non-alcoholic beer at this event, because it gave me the ability to do that. So there's a sort of a leadership component to that too.
Yeah, you know what? And I completely agree that those of us that are comfortable kind of wearing the recovery out loud, if you can, I think it's really, really important. And luckily for me, with my personality and just the way I even started my recovery, I was always pretty upfront about, hey, I don't drink, and like you're probably glad I don't, whether you know it or not, that kind of thing. And it always went over well. And if it didn't go over well, that means I was kind of in the wrong place. But like you, Colleen, I've had several people kind of pull me to the side, like, hey, thanks for saying that, or thanks for being so upfront about it, because I've been struggling myself, or I'm trying to cut back, or my niece is da 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 da, and so it's it's everywhere.
So we're kind of, we've talked about it already a little bit, but just explicitly as we talk about, some of these events, after work happy hours, conferences, why does that optional not often feel optional at work, whether it's an after work, outside of work event, especially, when alcohol is involved?
I mean, my honest 2 cents is that it's all performative. Just like it's, even if you take out the drinking or whatever it is that you're going to do, a lot of times it seems optional, but their performance is being based on, were you there? Were you quote unquote a team player? I don't know how going to the bar is making you a team player. Like, you're not doing it work, but that comes up in people's minds. And so I have seen that come up when I'm doing performance reviews as an HR leader, where someone will say, well, this person really, like, she just keeps to herself. Like, she doesn't really get involved and she doesn't help. And when you start asking questions about help with what, then it's like, oh, well, they're not a part of the clique, they're not in the squad that's always together. And so when it's sad to say, but I feel like you really never get out of high school. Like the high school people are always still there, just lurking. Like, it's like the lurk community, I feel like. But I say that to say it makes it feel like it's really not optional. Just like when we talk about like exit interviews or employee engagement surveys, like, is it really optional, or does your leader they tell you it's optional with like a side wink of, you better do this? So it feels almost threatening to not do these things, especially when you're young in your career. So, at my stage now, I'm a chief people officer. I have a very I'll do whatever I want. You can't tell me what to do. But 22-year-old Jessica was fall in line, follow orders. I want to move up. And so I had a very different persona. And if I really look back at some of the situations that I put myself in with my coworkers, it just all bad. Like, nothing good could have come of it from anybody involved, anybody that was there, that was a part of it, that knew what was going on. And yet it was an expectation. So like, it just doesn't make sense that, you're putting your job on the line too sometimes when you're in these situations. And I have had, after some holiday parties, I have had to fire people for actions that they took because they were under the influence. And so when you think about it from that lens, first of all, I'm surprised I never got fired. I wasn't above it. I was Hot Mess Express too, so it's one of those, and then thinking about that, if you really, really think about it, I don't know of anything good that has come from being drunk around your coworkers. I'll say it that way.
I mean, if I could add to that, I think, as we're sitting here talking through, I think what's interesting about it not being optional is the feeling of why it's not optional, I think, can vary by, organization to organization or industry, but it also tends to change dependent on your seniority within the organization. Because yes, to Jessica's point, when you're early on, you're like, gosh, I got to go because I got to be present, right? Like, I don't want them to think I don't care. But what I found myself doing as I continue to climb the corporate ladder, and especially when you work for larger enterprises, one of the things you learn as you climb that ladder is it is very political. And the only way you get to know the politics and get to know what so-and-so feels about this process or this thing or whatever, again, nobody's having that political talk during 9 to 5. It's just, it doesn't really happen unless they already have really trusted and established rapport with you. And so when you're trying to climb that ladder and figure your way out and figure things out, and how do I fit, or do I fit, or, is my philosophy on my department match the organizations and this other leader, right? One of the only ways to really get at that sometimes is to attend these things as you climb. And so I just think as you climb the ladder, or you change and shift where you're at seniority-wise in the organization, the feeling of why you attend these things also changes.
That's exactly right. And I think that's why it's so incumbent upon us as leaders to, make the changes, right? Because, for instance, I have a niece that will be entering the workforce here pretty soon, right? And I would tell her, listen, it is political, and you are going to have to go to some of these things, even when you don't want to. If I were you, I wouldn't be the first one to try to change how this works, because it's not how it works still. But that's why it's important for us as leaders to try to create these workplaces where it's not so much pressure around these social events in the same way.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that leading by example is huge and really helpful and important for us to do. And I think it's probably a whole other conversation about these kind of external from work social events that are really important to our careers. But in terms of alcohol specifically, I think that's where, again, if you're in an environment where someone's going to ask you a question or even kind of look at you funny if you order a non-alcoholic drink, right, that doesn't feel optional. I think you can have an organization where, yeah, that kind of external social engagement, that's all still there. I think that can remain important in a lot of ways. But you can do that with, a seltzer water. It's not going to stop you from having a social interaction. And if you're with people who give you signals, verbal or not, that is going to be a problem, right? That is then when it, I think, stops feeling optional, at least in the moment. And then, as Jessica was saying, right, if it's coming up specifically in like performance reviews of like, are you a team player? Are you a fit? All of those kind of things, right? Then as HR leaders, I think we have an ability there, hopefully, to step in and really draw some lines of what are we evaluating people on? And is it really their job?
A whole lot of people come to work to make BFF drinking buddies, and I'm like, why? I think like go find friends that like yoga class or something. It's especially if you are the leader. Is like I think this is really a moment for leaders to look in the mirror around your behaviors, even if you grew up and leaders were acting this way. Like Erin said it perfectly. It's time for us to lead the change, because it's not fair for us to put this on the generations now coming into the workforce and having to navigate this. We've danced around this already a little bit, and the topic's super interesting to me, and it's how power dynamics, client relationships, advancement, all of these kind of intersect with a lot of these alcohol-centered norms we experience in the workplace. And we've talked a little bit about, advancement power dynamics, but we maybe haven't talked a little bit about the client aspect as well. Anyone have any thoughts or experience they'd like to add around this?
I mean, I've kind of said it even with leaders, but I can put it in different words. It becomes a proxy for access, right? Whether that is with senior leadership or whether that is with clients, right? I mean, prime example, as I'm preparing to go to this conference, we are all in sessions all day long, but there are people that I need and want to network with while I'm there. So what am I saying? Hey, let's grab a drink, or hey, let's grab a coffee, right? And I think it is important in this discussion to emphasize that it's not necessarily that drinking in and of itself is bad, right? I think, it's just that we got to make sure we're providing workplaces in which folks that don't feel comfortable, don't want to participate, are in fact able to do that, because everybody's lives are just different, right? And I think that becomes our responsibility as leaders. I like to call it the what car does she drive problem. I gave a speech on this in Jacksonville, Florida earlier this year. And the what car does she drive problem is the necessity on knowing human beings for human beings, right? And this to me is, as a leader, just a what car does she drive problem. Do you know your employee well enough to know whether you are putting them in an environment in which makes them uncomfortable or they don't feel safe, right? And so, for me, it really is that. We need to pause and ask ourselves, what car does she drive? Do I know them well enough to know here, whether this is something that's good for them or maybe not good for them?
I really love that, Mitchell. And I think what's coming up for me is, what is the intent that you are driving as a leader for when you're creating these spaces? Like you said, like drinking is not inherently bad. I'm a pub girl. I am a social person. I still go to the pub. I just don't drink alcohol. And so when I am designing these spaces with my teams, what am I driving? Right. And so I really love what you're saying about that, Mitchell.
I think one thing that comes up that I've seen when I did a brief foray into a more sales related role, and I also see sometimes now that I'm in the nonprofit sector with some of our events that are kind of donor focused, right? I think there is a sense sometimes that when there's alcohol involved, right, people are maybe more inclined to open their pocketbooks. You're trying to create an environment that has kind of that good feeling where folks are having fun. And so that's something that I think we can be intentional about. What is the environment we're trying to create and why? How can we make other options? And if for whatever reason, there is a particular client, particular donor, whatnot, where that is the way to connect with them, right? Hopefully we have workplaces where as leaders, right, we can either assign the staff who have expressed that they specifically feel comfortable with that, or we've planned with our staff on how are you going to navigate this to make sure you're feeling safe and comfortable in this environment, right? So if some of those things are feeling like kind of like a business necessity, right? What do we do to help our employees still feel good and safe and supported?
I want to share one quick little story about this because I think it's quite funny. Is that at Winder Law for Christmas, like a lot of like the vendors and the people that we work with, whatever, they give gifts, and so we had a lot of people drop off gifts, like gift baskets, all these like elaborate gifts, and it was funny to me because the people that like knew Aaron and I, everything was like non-alcoholic or da da da. And then the people that didn't, we got a bunch of like really nice wines. And so it would be so funny because every time we would get something that was like a really nice wine, I'd say like, oh, this person doesn't know us. You know what I mean? Like it was a parameter of like how well do they know us? Now, mind you, it was lovely. We took it. We honestly gave it to friends and family that do drink, and they loved it. Like they're like, we're happy they don't know y'all. But it was like a thing of like, we are the client they're trying to impress, and yet they're giving us wine, and we talk about this so openly. So it was something that we even clocked from that side of it of like, oh, you don't know us well enough.
And I think there's that assumption there around gift giving. I got some random email this week from someone I've never met that was like, hey, I saw that you did this on LinkedIn. Can I offer to send you a free bottle of bubbles? And I'm like, you don't know me, sir. Like, what is happening here? Like, it's so inherent. And it's like, it's as simple as like, hey, you're giving gifts. Don't assume people drink alcohol. And, when Ellie was talking about creating a fun environment, something actually came up for me. And I have my little example here in my hand. But one thing I want to call out is, we are talking quite a bit about alcohol. I think it makes a lot of sense. But I think there's something else out there that may not come up as often, but I think it is relevant, and that's gambling. So I think recovery, addiction, gambling is a real thing, and we hear about it more and more because gambling is so accessible now. And I know sometimes there are events and people do like casino nights or little gambling events. How many darn conferences are in Vegas in casinos? And I think, again, we're automatically defaulting to this place where, oh, yeah, that's fun. That's cool for everyone. And I won't say who did it, but I have this little poker chip here, and I've seen this more than once, and it has like 988 information about like suicide and like you're not alone. And I've seen a lot of people, hand out these poker chips, to support, people who are, experiencing suicidal ideation or challenges or coping with addiction and recovery. And it's like, but what if they're in recovery for gambling addiction? Like, why are we handing them a poker chip? And I've seen this more than once. And again, it's getting more perspectives. It's trying to be inclusive. It's not defaulting to these designs that's the norm. Maybe it doesn't have to be. To kind of pivot a little bit to put our, HR compliance legal hats on, from a risk and safety lens, what are organizations really accomplishing? And what are the benefits of a sobriety and recovery friendly workplace when we think about it in terms of creating better cultures, creating better, risk management in our cultures?
Well, I will start with, I think by creating a culture that is not so focused on alcohol and partying and whatnot, I think you just automatically increase retention. Jessica and I have, I think as she said earlier, we have 4 kids, right? 2 that are 2.5 years old and 2 that are 1 year old, right? So, a lot of happy hours and things like that, I opted out of the last couple of years, well, because I wanted to, but also because I have kids, right? And I got to get home, and like I can't really do that. And of course, now that I have kids, I have a new respect for for our colleagues that have children and that cannot really attend all of these events. And so, I think by creating environments where you can advance and you could be part of the team, and not have to expend energy and time after work, it's really helpful for a lot of people with elderly parents or, folks with special needs or, whatever it is. I think it's helpful for employee retention.
I want to jump in. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Ellie.
I was just going to say, I just wanted to jump in. And first of all, Erin and Jessica, oh my gosh, 4 little ones. You both look remarkably energetic and awake, and I have all the respect in the world for you, because I have one kiddo who is finally a bit older, and that was enough in terms of energy. 4, my goodness. Way to go, bringing up the next generation. Good folks. So thank you. And one of the things that we have done at my current workplace is we do have not a lot of folks with kids, but we do have some, and several of the folks we have with kids, we know are single parents, right? When we have workplace events, we try to hold them at places that, if it is at some place that has alcohol, pub, whatever, that it is also a place that is open to minors. We try and make it welcoming so that if someone does want to bring their kiddo with them, so that they can still engage in that environment, that's an option. And try and create it so that there's no pressure to do so, that you don't have to. But like, if that's the reason that someone's not going and they would like to go, right? That sure, if you got a couple people with kids, they can hang out over in the corner and watch cartoons on a tablet or something. Like, that's okay. We'd rather have people there if they'd like to be there.
I want to point out something, because I think what Ellie just said is going to make a lot of people cringe. And I think there's an opportunity to reframe this in a way that actually is a positive for you as a leader, right? Because what happens when you see your employee interact with their kid? What happens when the employee brings a kid who maybe is learning disabled and you didn't know, right? What happens is it's the what car does she drive problem all over again. You start to learn so much about this employee as they are as a human that is now going to help you interact with them better as a leader. The challenge is, though, is sometimes I think we get stuck in these modes of going, ew, like, why would we want that at a corporate event? We're trying to blah, 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 right? But there's actually a little bit of a gold mine there if you allow yourself to play in the messiness of something that is different, that could actually help you succeed in managing that individual more.
That's so great. I also, just to go back to the risk point, Stephanie, like you inherently decrease the risk if you are creating sober friendly environments and creating opportunities for gathering and connection that don't revolve around alcohol. So you're just like cutting that. We've all been on the unfortunate, well, if you're in HR, on the unfortunate side of having those post-holiday party conversations.
Yeah, been there, done that, led the committee. One thing that I do want to point out is I think even being mindful of, like, if you're going to have something, how are you getting people home? So one of the things at my last job we did is that I would actively be walking around, like, kind of like eyeing, like, okay, this person's going to need an Uber. And like, it was like a thing that people knew that like, if I come up to you and ask you for your car keys, like, you're done. Don't argue with me. Like, we're going to get you home. Because I actually was in a situation one time where I had to chase someone down. Like, they left, they're going in the parking lot. I'm like, hey, where is this person? And they're like, oh, they're leaving. And I'm like, no, not on my watch. And so I'm running like an Avenger and like trying to get in front of his truck. And I did, and we got him in an Uber. He was fine. But it was one of those situations that, like, we served him all of these things for free. He didn't pay for a single thing, and he does not need to be driving. So I think even being mindful of that, like, are you putting your company at risk? Because I also have been in situations where employees have gotten DUIs, and said, well, it was the company's fault. Like, they paid for these drinks. And I have worked at a company that took the responsibility for that person's DUI and did pay for their lawyer and all their things, because it was also a reputation risk to it as well. So thinking about it from a business and a leadership standpoint is also true, that like, if something happens to someone, and eventually it will, if that's all you're doing, how are you going to rectify it? Because I've been there and it is not pretty.
It's so true. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with the reputational risk, Jessica. I mean, if, I spent so many years in construction, people are driving company vehicles that are not just company vehicles. Oftentimes they are driving billboards for that organization. Another aspect of reputational, I've had leaders who have had DUIs, and I've had them leading people who have had family members who were seriously injured or killed in DUI accidents. There's so much there, whether it is personal or just like reputational from a public standpoint that comes across. I also think from like that employee relations hat, I can't seem to throw away yet. I think about what it means in terms of the Americans with Disabilities Act, FMLA, the different laws that come into place as well. People are actually able to have coverage and need to have support under these laws, under this legislation, to have access to time off, to have access to recovery. And so, you may have a zero tolerance alcohol and drug policy right now. And I'm here to tell you, a zero tolerance alcohol and drug policy may not be recovery friendly. It may also be against the law, depending on where you are. And there's a lot of really complex things that go into this. But it's really important to understand that recovery starts with that one person taking that one step. And that becomes, being able to create that opportunity in that space in your workplace is really key. And, this is not alcohol specific, but I'm a big proponent of employers having Narcan on site, and having Narcan accessible. I have my little Narcan back here. I don't know if folks can see it. It's a little pink box. And there's a lot of great resources about building policies around Narcan or naloxone use. And it's this idea that if someone has, an issue with addiction, if someone does experience an overdose, we're not here to judge or make a difference. We're here to make sure they have an opportunity to have that day one of recovery, to start on that journey. And really thinking of it in that expansive way, I think, can be a huge game changer. I also think it helps us really navigate some of these changing laws, dynamics, benefits as well for those of us who are HR practitioners and leaders also. I know we're almost, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I just wanted to jump in and call back to one of the things that Mitchell said earlier in the conversation about having an environment where folks do feel comfortable disclosing. And hopefully that is in general that folks feel like they can be open about what they want to be open with, but certainly with us as HR leaders and HR professionals, we need to have an environment where if someone does have support needs, that they are able to come and express those. Because we do have an obligation to provide that support. And in order for someone to access that support, right, we need to be able to be in a setting where they can let us know that they need it. Sometimes we might be able to see and ask questions, but sometimes we may not know. And so we want to be welcoming.
Yeah, I wanted to add to this, and I know, Stephanie, maybe you were going to get to this question, but having worked in the space as long as I have, we have a lot of different policies. And we've talked a lot here about how we can, as leaders, right, try to help support this environment. But one of the things we haven't talked about is explicitly what we can do in things like policy to support this. And there's a couple really clear ones that I would encourage folks to think about. First and foremost, I think every organization should have some sort of last chance agreement. If you've never heard of one of those, it is something that is often utilized in the recovery realm, in recovery facilities, but certainly work with legal counsel on it. But often what that will say is, it will save your job. If you come to us and say, I need you to know I've relapsed, or I need you to know I have a problem, then what we do is we actually give you the time off to go seek that without terminating your employment. And so it allows them a way to go get the help that they need. Now, of course, if we catch you, it's probably a little bit different circumstance, but I will also say not always. There are times that even when we have caught somebody, we will still initiate a last chance agreement. So I think that's one to think about. I also think that people need to reevaluate how they look at background checks and their policy around reviewing background checks, okay? Because if somebody was in the active throes of addiction and when they committed a crime and they are now sober and in recovery, should we look at the crime the same way? I'm not sure that we should. And I think there's an opportunity to give grace and second chance to folks when that has occurred, obviously dependent on the crime and the role they're going into and so on and so forth. Another one that I would say is a really big one is folks do need to have strong partnerships with their EAP programs, understand how the EAP can support folks, because often there are something called management referrals with EAP programs where you can help facilitate them through this process. And then also knowing your local SUD facilities, right, and where those are, and maybe having a partnership with them. Trust me, that's working in the SUD realm. Those business development reps love to have partnerships with employers. They absolutely love that. And the third one I would say, and this is a little bit more niche, but I actually think an important distinction is to reevaluate if you have a tobacco-free workplace policy. And hang tight with me here for a second, because I think some of you are probably going to cock your head a little bit at me. But the reason for that is in recovery spaces, that often is a vice for individuals that helps them, right? It is something that they hang on to. And so if you do not allow a space or a place people can go smoke, you may actually be inadvertently increasing their cravings, and you're not really intending to.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. All right. I know we're almost out of time. Unfortunately, it went so quickly. It always does. Wanted to thank you all so much for taking the time to stay with us and share with us. I would love to, if each of you could share, if someone is interested in learning more, doing more, building out some of these resources, do you have a book, a podcast, article, or other resources you might recommend to check out? And feel free to jump in whenever you're ready.
I'm happy to jump in. I failed to mention during my introduction that I am also on the board of the National Alliance of Mental Illness, the New York City chapter. We have an amazing workplace mental health collaborative that is available to large and small employers, and we partner with leaders to create programs around mental health, not specifically substance abuse, but that is certainly a part of it, but create programs that target the organization's needs. So I would highly recommend finding your local nonprofit, your local NAMI affiliate, because they probably have something along those lines.
Awesome. Thank you.
I would say again, I said it before, but if you know where your local or some of your local SUD treatment facilities are, they often always have some sort of community resource or provide, AA groups that are free and open to the public. So they do often provide a lot of these resources, typically because they try to do that to continue to engage the alumni of the programs in which they've worked. And then, if anybody's really looking on a policy end, as I mentioned, I've done this work for a while. So my organization is always open to helping folks review these policies and try to help create policies that are more sober friendly.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, I too was going to recommend reaching out to some local organizations, but I'm going to pivot and say to jump into that kind of policy and what do we think about when we look at background checks. I'm going to recommend that you connect with whoever it is at your organization, or if it's you, work with your carrier to find out with your legal counsel and or your professional liability insurance, right? What are your options for particular positions around background checks? Where do you need to be strict? And where can you consider circumstances and be more open for folks?
I love that. Great idea.
I will jump in and say I'll go on a more personal, like if you are someone who is struggling or thinking about it or just want to talk about it, like I'm down. Like I'm always on LinkedIn. If you LinkedIn message me, you will get a response. People are always shocked. Like I will respond to you. But yeah, I want to just say that I talk openly about it on LinkedIn a lot. I post a lot about it. I did a sobriety post, this week. So I want to just have that be open to that. You can absolutely talk to me about it. Even if you're trying to do a policy, I've done that too from an HR standpoint. So if you want to talk personal or from an HR standpoint, I'm open.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I was something similar, right? I mean, first of all, I'm always available for any sorts of conversations for individuals that may be interested. And then also, I just give a shout out to your local, Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous or those sort of groups. There's moderation programs, anything like that. I would always check it out, give it a shot. You never know which one is for you.
Amazing. This was so amazing. Thank you, everyone, so much. And thank you for joining us. We'll be back again next month, but I cannot imagine a more amazing group of people and a more important topic to start the year off with. So thank you all so much.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.